All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, all you magnificent melon heads of the world, and happy Tuesday, everybody. Today is June 3rd, 2025. And a top story this morning. We got a nuclear story this morning. Another big AI data center paired with nuclear power story. And this one hits a little close to home to me. You guys may know my background. I used to work in nuclear power. As a matter of fact, I used to work for the company we're going to talk about. But this plant that we're talking about here, the Clinton Power Station in Illinois, this one kind of hits close to home for me because the plant I used to work at in New Jersey, we shut down in 2018. It was a very hard time for nuclear power during the late 2010s. Power prices were super low. A lot of the post-Fukushima regulatory increases were just strangling plants. And they closed my plant in 2018. Then a year later, they closed 3 Mile Island. Then a year later, the Clinton Power Station was supposed to be closed. They saved it at the last minute with a handout from the government. You may not know this, but this company has a reputation for lining the pockets of politicians. And so favorable legislation at the Illinois State House managed to keep Clinton alive until 2027. But that plant was announced in 2017. They were going to close it before the bailout from the state. And so Clinton Power Station was one of those plants that was on the chopping block, and they actually were sentenced to death. They were given a reprieve. And so it's a single unit site. It's a very modern plant, a BWR6 reactor. It's one of the most modern reactors in our country. But it was never a big moneymaker. Single unit reactor sites just aren't as profitable as the big dual unit sites that have 2 reactors. You can share a security force. You share the same real estate. There's a lot of economies of scale at dual and triple unit sites. The single unit sites just never really had a chance. So Clinton Power Station cuts a deal this morning with Facebook parent Meta. And Meta is going to buy 1.1 gigawatts, 1,100 megawatts of power from the Clinton Power Station, which is pretty much all of the output from this nuclear reactor. Will be going to power Meta's data centers starting in 2027. Now, that's kind of interesting. That's 2 years out. 2 years from now, are we still going to be going gung-ho, gangbusters, apeshit, whatever you want to say, crazy for data centers and power demand? I don't know. My gut tells me probably not, but this is good news for the people at Clinton. It's a 20-year agreement. By the way, that will extend the life of Clinton Power Station for probably another 20 years. So this is a stay of execution for that plant because those government subsidies from the state of Illinois were scheduled to go away starting in 2027. That is exactly when this deal with Meta picks up. So this is the second of these big nuclear AI deals. Same company, as a matter of fact. Constellation is also the owner of 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island cut a similar deal to directly power data centers with Microsoft about a year ago. So this is the second such deal of existing nuclear plants signing very lucrative contracts with Silicon Valley, with Mag 7 companies in order to power their data centers. I suspect we'll probably see some more of these before this data center bubble finally bursts. But there's also some pretty interesting things going on with this deal as well. There was some wording in the article on CNBC that I want to highlight because we may end up seeing some court challenges to stories like this because we have deregulated grids in the Northeast, and it's not supposed to work this way. The big players are not supposed to be able to cut these big, massive deals with the power plants, leaving homeowners and small businesses in the lurch to bid up the price of whatever remaining scraps of power are on the grid. It's not really supposed to work that way. Deregulation was sold to the public that it would give you cheaper power because it would be a free market and everybody would have to bid competitively. Well, that doesn't work if the biggest players are allowed to buy their power in bulk at a discount, leaving everybody else out in the lurch. So we'll talk about that one in a little bit, but that's a big deal this morning. Constellation stock is ripping. It's up. At one point, it was up over 15%. It's up about 10% the last I looked. But this is important, guys, because utility stocks like Constellation, it is a utility stock. They're supposed to be boring companies. They're supposed to trade like bonds, right? Like if you're like a senior citizen or something and you're like, oh, I'm feeling a little risky, maybe I'll trade some of my U.S. treasuries for utility stocks, which are typically only slightly more volatile than bonds, right? They're not supposed to be exciting investments. They're sure as heck not supposed to move plus or minus 10 to 15% in a day. That's not how utility stocks behave. It's just one more of those things that maybe should be in the back of people's minds as we're watching this bubble continue to inflate. Like, hey, this isn't supposed to do this. We're not supposed to be exciting, flashy, bananas on the wall, going crazy for my gains in my utility stocks. It's supposed to be a safe place to park money where you make a little bit of money in dividends because everybody needs power. When these things start going vertical, something is off in the market. I'm just throwing that out there. But let's not throw too much cold water on this. This is a very good deal for the nuclear industry. This is a big deal. The nuclear industry needs something like this. I'm a firm believer in nuclear power. I think we should be building more nuclear reactors as well as preserving the ones we have. All right, let's shift gears a little bit then. We've got some data out of China this morning. We've got the cakes and manufacturing PMI came in 48.3. That is the lowest since 2022. Now, this is interesting because this data was collected after the big deal in Sweden, right? Remember, the U.S. and the Chinese delegations got together in Stockholm. Was it Stockholm? I think it was Stockholm. They got together. They announced the framework to a path to a hopefully someday maybe we'll actually have a deal. It was as good as everybody could hope. And then, of course, everything fell apart last week. But this data was all collected after those tariffs were lowered from 145% down to 45, or from 130 down to 30%. But still, we saw a decline in manufacturing in China. So the tariffs continue to cut over there. We also had some details on Chinese consumer spending over this Dragon Boat Festival weekend. That's showing a little bit of signs of stress there. Chinese consumers are cutting back on their spending because they're uncertain about their jobs. And of course, their homes have gone down in value. So it's hard to get good, reliable data out of China. So when you actually do get some data, it's important to take a look at what you have and then consider the government influences that might be impacting that data. We got an interesting story out of Vietnam. The Vietnamese, several Vietnamese companies have signed MOUs to buy $2 billion worth of U.S. agricultural products. That is almost certainly the result of ongoing trade negotiations involving the tariffs. So the fact that the Vietnamese are signing deals to buy U.S. farm goods, maybe that means a reduction in Vietnamese tariffs is on the horizon. But the big thing to keep an eye on there is the Vietnamese repackaging of Chinese manufactured goods in order to avoid those tariffs on China. Can we get that cracked down on? Because if we are going to put these restrictions on China, if the Chinese can just make their crap and then ship it to Vietnam, then the Vietnamese put it in a different box and sell it to us and say made in Vietnam on it, well, then really it's not having the desired effect on China that we're hoping for. So Vietnam has always been a very major player in this ongoing trade war with the Chinese. So keep an eye on that story. We've got Volkswagen is very happy to report on 20,000 what are they calling it? Socially responsible job cuts. Somebody can tell me what a socially responsible job cut is. I'd sure love to know, but Volkswagen's very happy. 20,000 out of the desired 35,000 in headcount reduction that they promised by the end of this decade is currently underway. These people have agreed to early departures, which means some kind of voluntary separation package, probably a bonus or extended benefits and severance to leave early. We got good earnings from Dollar General this morning, although probably not something you want to celebrate when the dollar stores are doing really well. It's almost always at somebody else's expense because more people are going to the dollar stores in order to avoid more expensive things elsewhere. They're trading down. And we got another interesting story out of Europe this morning. Denmark has quit the Frugal 4. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know Frugal 4 was a thing. I had never heard the phrase Frugal 4 before this morning. But apparently there were 4 countries in Europe, Austria, Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark, that were all about responsible fiscal behavior, cut spending. We're not going to go deeper in debt. Well, now the Frugal 4 is the Frugal 3. It's just another sign that there is no hope of spending cuts in Europe. Let's just be honest about it, guys. Europe is going on a spending bender, and the fact that the Frugal 4 is now the Frugal 3 is just another indicator. Look, if your investing thesis or your trade basis is all about the debasement of currency in order to enable reckless fiscal spending, then you're in good shape here, right? Because in the U.S., we had this whole like Doge thing. We all pretended to give a shit about spending for about a month. And then that all went away. Now we're back to cranking up the deficits again. Europe is even worse. China is turning on the stimmy fire hose. Japan is already lost. let's admit it, guys, the whole currency debasement, the financial repression trade, that is alive and well, and that's not going to change anytime soon. We got a lot to talk about once again this morning. Why don't we shrink my big melon of a head and let's see what's going on in the market this morning. Hey, don't forget that like button and that subscribe button for the YouTube algorithm, because we do this one every day. So come on back and have your coffee with the melon heads tomorrow. And right now we've got the S&P is still slightly in red territory here. It's down 4 points or 0.07%. Not a lot of move happening in the S&P. But I want to show you something that I noticed in the S&P chart. This is looking at daily candles for the S&P 500. Now, I just want to show you, here's the close on Thursday right here. You see that? There's Thursday's close. We went to bed Thursday. We were still playing nice in the sandbox with the Chinese, or at least pretending to. The Europeans were talking. You know, we were having some headway was made. And then Friday came along, and of course, the taco trade upset Mr. Orange. And so, you know, the Chinese, all caps on Truth Social, they're not playing nice. So no more Mr. Nice Guy. And then steel and aluminum tariffs got doubled. We're right back to trade war mania, right? But look at the S&P 500, guys. The S&P 500 right now is higher than we were at the close on Thursday before this escalation in the trade war. Do you think maybe the market has taken this taco thing just a little bit too much to heart? You think maybe they're kind of running away with it? Why is the S&P 500 right now higher than we were before this most recent escalation in the trade war put 145% tariffs potentially back on the table? The market is just completely betting that Trump outright surrenders here. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mr. Orange's business history. The guy doesn't mind declaring bankruptcy. He's done it several times. Like, betting that he will outright surrender, maybe that's the right bet, but it's definitely not a sure thing. And the market is treating this like it's already a foregone conclusion. There's no negativity whatsoever priced into this market. It's just we are back to that eternal optimism, and I'm just not sure that is the right take here. So maybe a little bit more caution is in order here, but I digress. Let's move on with what's going on in the market this morning. The Dow, meanwhile, down 58 points, 0.14% lower ahead of the opening bell. And the NASDAQ is actually in positive territory here, up 10 points, probably on that Constellation trade with Meta. Looking over at the U.S. dollar, I did not get my chart set up ahead of the time. I am remiss. We've got the dollar recovering yesterday's losses, 99.10. That's up by 42 basis points, correcting, or I should say recapturing most of what it lost yesterday. Dollar lost about 50 basis points yesterday. We're getting 40 of them back today. Now, looking over at the bond market here, we've got a lot of red, yields heading lower. That's bond prices heading higher, remember. So people are bidding up bonds a little bit this morning. 30-year Treasury, 4.960. That's down by 3.5 points. The 10 years at 4.427, also down 3.5 points. The 2 years at 3.937, that's off by a fraction of 1 point. And the 1 month is actually up a fraction of a point at 4.290. Still a lot of calm in the bond market. Again, considering what happened on Friday and over the weekend, the potential for re-escalation in the trade war, the bond market is also a little too quiet, a little too optimistic here, in my opinion. Everybody's just kind of forgetting what a loose cannon President Trump is. I think they ought not do that. Right now, on the commodities board, we've got gold is giving back a little bit of its gains yesterday. Gold was up about $90 yesterday. Here we are giving back about 20 of that this morning. Spot gold is at $3,360. That's off by $21, or about 2/3% here. Silver's in the same boat after gaining $1.50 yesterday. It's given up about 40 cents of that this morning. Spot silver's at $34.35. That's lower by about 1.17%. We've got copper is off by 0.5%. Platinum is off by 0.9%. Palladium is up by almost 2%. And crude oil is a little higher once again this morning. Oil's had a good couple of days here. July WTI futures at 62.97. That's higher by 45 cents or 0.7%. Now, I got a couple people mention this in the comments yesterday, and they were very good comments. And then we've got this one to the same effect from First Squawk on Twitter this morning, talking about oil here. The headline was that OPEC is increasing oil output, but when you actually read beyond the headlines, you realize that they're really only increasing the quota to what they're already producing. And so we're actually not resulting with that much new oil hitting the market. And that could explain why prices have actually gone up since this production increase. First squawk here is saying OPEC has increased oil output, with crude production rising by 200,000 barrels per day in May. Now, they announced a 411,000 barrel per day production increase, but we only actually got 200,000 because really all they did was raise the quota to what they were already producing. Countries like Kazakhstan and Iraq were already producing more than their allocated quota. And so it really wasn't as big of a production increase as the headline made it seem like. This is marking the beginning of a significant series of increases. Okay, now that we're at the quota level, now future increases are actual more oil hitting the market, whereas some of the prior increases was just bringing the quota in line with what they were producing anyway. Looking over at Bitcoin, we are a little bit higher than we were yesterday. At one point yesterday, we dipped down below 104,000. We were in the 103s for a little bit. Now we are back above 105,000, sitting here as priced on Coinbase, $105,485. Bitcoin still kind of consolidating here. Something tells me we will get one more big run in Bitcoin over the summer. That is before the onset of winter, which will happen sometime in late summer, early fall this year. As always, guys, be careful on leverage when dealing with Bitcoin. Now, here's the main story this morning. This is the big one. Constellation Energy rallies 15% on Meta nuclear power deal. This is the second such deal after Microsoft cut their famous deal to revive 3 Mile Island. Another nuclear plant is potentially saved here. Meta has signed a 20-year agreement to buy nuclear power from Constellation Energy, continuing the wave of tech giants teaming up with the industry in order to meet the growing power needs of data centers. Beginning in June of 2027, Meta will buy roughly 1.1 gigawatts of energy from Constellation Clean Energy Center in Illinois, which is the entire output from the site's one nuclear reactor. The company said the long-term agreement will support the continuing operation of the plant as well as its relicensing. Without the commitment from Meta, the plant was in danger of closing when its zero emissions credits, which it relied on since 2017, expired. Now, that's important because at the time those zero emission credits were in power, Constellation was actually owned by a company called Exelon. They since spun off. They broke up in two, Exelon and Constellation. But Exelon had a reputation for lining the pockets of state politicians in Illinois. They actually had a pretty high-profile story about that in the late 20-teens, early 2020s, right around the time this favorable legislation was passed in Illinois, I should point out. That legislation is set to expire in 2027. So this deal with Meta is just in time to make up for the handout from the government. Now Meta is going to be buying the power directly. We are proud to partner with Meta. They figured out that supporting the relicensing and expansion of existing plants is just as impactful as finding new sources of energy, said Joe Dominguez, Constellation's president and CEO. Sometimes the most important part of our journey forward is to stop talking steps backwards. Here he's referring about how Constellation, that plant, has been on the chopping block for years. They announced they were closing the plant in 2017. It was that legislation that saved it. And now this deal comes along just in time. Terms of the deal, which will also expand Clinton's output by 30 megawatts, were not disclosed. The plant will not power Meta's data centers directly. Instead, it will continue to provide power to the regional grid while contributing to the tech giant's goal of 100% clean energy. So there's a couple of important things here. Technically, Clinton, the nameplate capacity of Clinton is like 1,067 megawatts. So they're talking about a 30 megawatt uprate here. Now that's a slight change to things like the pressure they operate their condensers at, changes to the non-nuclear side that'll allow them to generate just a little bit more electricity. Those uprates don't involve a lot of big changes to the power plant's hardware. It's mostly regulatory approvals, a lot of legal work here. So this deal, they're going to hopefully squeeze another 30 megawatts out of that plant. But the big thing here, they're talking about the plant will not power Meta's data centers directly. Instead, it will continue to provide power to the regional grid while contributing to the tech giant's goal of 100% clean energy. Now, how do you jibe that statement where they're saying, nope, we're going to keep selling power to the grid with the fact that Constellation is buying 1.1 gigawatts of energy from the Clinton Center, basically the entire output of the plant? So what they're talking about here is deregulation. And sooner or later, this is going to end up in court, I suspect, because the way this is supposed to work is you've got the power producers sell power to the grid, and then the grid operators sell the power to the end consumers, which is companies, households, everybody else. Well, what's starting to happen right now is the power producers are starting to sell the power to these big consumers like Microsoft, like Meta, before the grid operators ever even have a chance to buy it from them, and before the average consumer ever has a chance to bid on that power himself, which means there's less power available being sold into the grid. And so the average consumer, households, you and I, we have to compete for less available power now, driving our final power prices higher, while Meta gets all the cheap power they need buying the entire nuclear plant, which, by the way, for the last 7-8 years has been paid for by your tax dollars in Illinois because, well, the company greases the pockets of politicians. And so this isn't a very good deal for the average household, is it? Now, again, I'm glad Clinton is staying alive here. I know a lot of the people who work at Clinton. This is very good news for the people at Clinton. This is good news for the power grid in its entirety. But this is not how deregulation is supposed to work. The big guys are not supposed to eat first, and then the little guys have to fight over what's left. It's supposed to be a free market where everybody bids on the same power equally. Now, the problem here is Constellation is both the power producer and one of the grid operators. So Constellation's like, oh, no, we're not selling the power directly from Clinton. We're not running a wire from Clinton to the data center on Facebook. No, we're selling it to the grid ourselves, and then ourselves are selling it to Meta before anybody else has a chance to bid on it. So I'm not sure how they're going to work this out legally, but sooner or later, these AI companies are going to be challenged in court by some consortium of retail power consumer advocates who are sick of paying higher power prices while the big tech data centers get cheap power at their expense. Sooner or later, this is going to end up in court. That being said, Constellation stock is doing very well here, 10.7% higher this morning, $347.88. Again, guys, utility stocks are not supposed to trade like this. Joe Dominguez, congratulations. You're killing it over there at Constellation. Look at what this boring utility stock has done in the last 5 years. It's up 724%. All right, it's kind of like if you own bonds and your bonds are up 724%, congratulations to you. But maybe something is majorly broken in the bond market if the bond price is rallying like that. It's not really supposed to do that. And again, utility stocks are considered bond market alternatives. They're not supposed to do this. So this just shows something is broken in the utility stock area. Anyways, Constellation doing really good here this morning. Meta, not so much. They're up a fraction of a percent, $671 for Meta, up about 80 cents on this news. But again, you look at a 5-year chart of Meta, they're up 188%. So, I mean, big tech, we're not talking utility stock performance here, but it's pretty good still, only 188% higher. All right, let's shift gears back over to China here. China's private factory gauge plunges to the weakest since 2022. Just goes to show you guys that deal that they cut to reduce the tariffs. It was not enough to save the Chinese factory activity, at least not when this data was collected. China's manufacturing sector had its worst slump since September of 2022, according to a private survey, as higher tariffs took a toll on smaller exporters despite a truce in the trade war with the U.S. The Caixin Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index fell to 48.3 in May from 50.4 in the prior month. That's according to a statement released by Caixin and S&P Global on Tuesday. While below the 50 mark, separating expansion from contraction, the figure was below every estimate in the Bloomberg survey of analysts, whose median was 50.7. Now, this is important, guys. This is technically private sector data. This is Caixin. That's a private outlet. But Caixin is a media company in China. There are no private companies in media in China. The CCP runs everything. So it is kind of unusual to see a negative data point like this, where the Chinese Communist Party typically has such a firm grasp around the neck of the people reporting the data while reserving the right to squeeze and choke off the flow of blood and oxygen to the brain should the data disappoint us. That being said, contraction territory, if they're willing to admit that they're in manufacturing contraction, that means actual situation on the ground, probably worse than that. The results were based on a poll conducted May 12th to May 21st. They were far weaker than the official PMI reading released on Saturday, which showed manufacturing contracted less thanks to the reprieve on tariffs. The National Bureau of Statistics typically conducts its surveys between the 22nd and 25th of every month. The timing differences may have contributed to the discrepancy in the two data sets, according to economists at Goldman Sachs Group, since China and the U.S. reached the agreement on May 12th to reduce tariffs for 90 days. So what they're saying here is maybe because the data, we started collecting this data immediately after the deal was announced, and the competing data set, the Bureau of Statistics data, they started collecting that several weeks later. Maybe there was still a little bit more of that 145% tariff reflected in this data, and that explains the difference between the two. But either way, guys, it's obvious the trade war is taking its toll on manufacturing in China. To how much or how big of an extent, that's up for debate because you just can't get reliable information out of China. But we also got a little bit of a glean into the position of the average Chinese consumer this morning as well. China holiday spending shrinks as consumer sentiment stays weak. Expenditures by Chinese consumers failed to pick up during the Dragon Boat Festival holiday, even though more people hit the road, reflecting subdued consumer confidence in an economy reeling from U.S. tariffs despite a trade truce. A total of 119 million trips were made domestically during the three-day holiday. That's up 5.7% from a year earlier. Travelers spent more money, 42.7 billion yuan, or about $5.9 billion. Now, that total is up 5.9%, figures provided by the Ministry of Culture and Tourism showed. But that means spending per trip was 359 yuan, down 2.2% from a year earlier, according to Bloomberg calculations based on the official numbers. All right, so there's a couple different ways you could look at this data. You've got more total money spent. That must be a sign of good things, right? You got more people traveling, spending more total money, but the average amount spent per person was down year over year. So, what are we really telling us here? You don't get a lot from this data, all right? The average person spent a little bit less, but more people traveled. I don't know that we can get that much activity from this, but again, it's hard to get reliable data out of China. So what data you do have, you really got to parse it and think about it. The average Chinese consumer has seen his household wealth decline sharply because of home values have shrunk. Now he's worried about his job because of the decline in the manufacturing sector. So it makes sense that people would be a little bit more cautious with their holiday spending. Although you do still have people taking a lot of trips here, more people versus a few years ago, still a little bit of that pent-up demand for travel because people were locked inside for so much longer in China than they were even over here in the West. And sticking with our Asian theme, Vietnam firms to sign MOUs to buy $2 billion of U.S. farm produce. So the president is out on the trail negotiating trade deals, and, well, the deals have been few and far between. We're like 60 days into that 90-day pause right now, and we don't have a lot to show for it yet, but we've got some progress from Vietnam this morning. Vietnamese firms will sign MOUs with U.S. partners to buy $2 billion worth of American farm produce, the Agriculture Ministry said on Tuesday, part of efforts to seal a new trade deal between the two countries. Vietnam has been slapped with 46% reciprocal tariffs by the Trump administration. Though they have been paused until July, if they come into effect, they should seriously undermine a growth model that relies on exports to the United States, its top market. The new deal, signed during a visit to the United States by a delegation of 50 Vietnamese companies, led by Agriculture Minister Du Doc Doi, includes 5 MOUs to buy $800 million of products from Iowa over 3 years, the Agriculture Ministry said. The Iowa MOUs involve purchase of corn, wheat, and dried distillers grains, and soybean meal, it added. So it looks like this is probably part of some larger trade deal being negotiated with the Vietnamese. But the big thing here is that repackaging of Chinese manufactured goods. Will they address that in any deal cut with the Vietnamese? If they don't address that, then you're giving the Chinese a backdoor to circumvent U.S. tariffs, and you damn well better be sure they're going to exploit it if you leave that backdoor open. Meanwhile, Volkswagen says 20,000 workers have agreed to early departures. More job cuts in the auto industry. Volkswagen said about 20,000 employees will voluntarily leave the company by the end of the decade as the car maker restructures its German operations to cope with uneven demand for its vehicles. The results show that the company's restructuring plans are on track, said Gunnar Killian, Volkswagen's head of human relations and board member. He told employees at a workers' assembly in Wolfsburg, with measurable progress on factory costs in Wolfsburg and socially responsible job cuts at Volkswagen's 6 German sites alone, we are accelerating our transformation, Killian said. Around 20,000 departures from the company by 2030 have already been contractually agreed. And he's very excited about those 20,000 heads rolling. Looking at it, he's like, yeah, this is going great. Good news, our firings are going very well. By the way, can somebody tell me what the hell is a socially responsible job cut? Can somebody tell me what that is? I don't know what a socially responsible job cut is, but our comrades at the Politburo will be very pleased with these socially responsible job cuts, that's for sure. Europe's largest car maker is in the process of reducing production capacity and headcount in Germany due to rising costs, weaker demand in Europe, and the rapid rise of Chinese competitors. Volkswagen brand management and labor leaders struck a deal in December to cut German production capacity by more than 700,000 units and decrease headcount by 35,000 jobs by the end of the decade. Sister brands Audi and Porsche are also cutting jobs to reduce costs. We're seeing the same thing at Nissan. We're seeing the same thing here in the U.S., guys. This is a rough time for the auto industry, and I suspect we'll see more headlines to this effect in the future. Dollar General, meanwhile, has lifted their annual sales target on demand for cheaper essentials. The dollar store is doing great, and that's probably not great news for everybody else. Dollar General on Tuesday raised its annual sales forecast after its quarterly results topped estimates as still high inflation and tariff-led economic uncertainty drove customers to its stores for affordable everyday essentials. The company shares jumped 8% in pre-market trading. They've risen about 28% so far this year. Dollar stores have historically stood a better chance to weather out tougher economic conditions as consumers shop for cheaper goods at these outlets to stretch their budgets. Dollar General now expects annual same-store sales growth between 1.5% and 2.5%, compared with its prior target of 1.2 to 2.2. The company's same-store sales for the 3 months ended May 2nd grew 2.4%, topping estimates of a 1.41% rise, according to data compiled by LSEG. Its first quarter earnings per share of $1.78 also handily beat estimates of $1.48. Pretty good quarter for Dollar General here. People are being driven to dollar stores to save money. And the opening bell has rung. Dollar General is up 13.2% this morning, trading at $110. That's up $12.50 this morning. Good day for Dollar General. And the last one, guys, say it ain't so. They're spending more money in Europe. Denmark quits Frugal EU group ahead of budget talks, the premier says. There was like four or five guys in Europe were like, let's not cut spending. Well, one of them just quit. Isn't that just great? Denmark will break away from the alliance of frugal nations as it enters the next round of European Union budget negotiations, the Nordic country's prime minister said, signaling a shift in priorities as security concerns dominate the bloc's agenda. Being a part of the Frugal Four is no longer the right place for us, said Mette Frederiksen at a press briefing in Copenhagen on Tuesday, because things have changed and the world is changing rapidly, and we have to find the right answers to all these challenges in front of us. And in a shocking turn of events, the right answer is to print and borrow more money. Go figure. It's amazing how it always works that way. The move marks a departure from Denmark's position during the 2020 EU budget and recovery fund negotiations when it joined Austria, the Netherlands, and Sweden in pushing for fiscal restraint, limited joint borrowing, and rebates for net contributors. The group, dubbed the Frugal Four, became a powerful force during the heated negotiations, frequently clashing with southern and eastern member states seeking more expansive EU spending. For me, the most important thing is to rearm Europe, Frederiksen said. That's my starting point, and that's my conclusion in all discussions, because if Europe is not able to protect ourselves and defend ourselves, then it's game over at some point. And once again here, guys, we are seeing the fallout from that breakdown in the Oval Office between Zelensky and Vance and Trump. More reckless spending in Europe. They are borrowing, printing, and spending. Zerpenberg is coming back because they're building up their army, because they are no longer depending, or supposedly they're claiming they can no longer be dependent on the United States for their defense after decades of calling us warmongers because we paid for their defense. Isn't it funny how that works? So one less country giving a shit about spending cuts in Europe. So you gold traders, you guys, you're probably okay here, because if you got into the gold trade because of currency debasement and reckless fiscal policy, no sign of that ebbing anytime soon. And I just want to say thank you very much to Freda Dog. All right, Freda Dog, what's going on? He says, Camacho for president. Are we talking about President of America, President Camacho? What movie was that? Let me know in the comments. Idiocracy. That's what it was. Idiocracy. Yes, President Camacho was the president. And we got this guy Nacho, and he's really smart, and so he's going to fix stuff. All right. First thing we're going to do is we're going to stop feeding Brondo to our crops, even though it's got electrolytes. It's the stuff plants crave. Kind of a bad movie. It's a great concept for a movie. It underdelivered. Really good idea, but anyway, it's hard to make a intellectually stimulating movie about a bunch of dumbasses. So anyways, thank you, Freda Dog, for the movie quote, sir. And thank you, John, for supporting the channel. Says, Elon makes Johnson look like a saint. I'm not president of the Elon fan club by any measure, but I wouldn't put him in the same category as Jensen. Pentagon raid, 10 gigabytes of U.S. DOD most sensitive data sent to Kremlin via his Starlink system, deeply in bed with Russia and Kremlin oligarchs, a scary pill to swallow. I am not familiar with that story. I'll look into it, John. All I got to say is like the whole, like if take whatever you don't like and then hyphenate it to Russia equals bad. I've seen that used way too much. Like just slap some Russia on whatever you don't like, and all of a sudden you don't need to actually do any real research or anything. Now, that being said, 10 gigabytes of data sent via Starlink, that's a big deal if that's actually happening. I didn't even know Starlink had DoD contracts. I could be wrong about that. But I would scrutinize that one, John. I haven't heard that one. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. Maybe that's a new breaking story. If so, we will cover it tomorrow. Yeah. And again, in Jensen is outright smuggling advanced AI tech to the Chinese. I wouldn't put him in the same category as Jensen. Jensen is a whole other level of treasonous filth, in my opinion. But hey, Jensen's selling $800 billion worth of stock paid for by stock buybacks of his own shareholders' cash. So, hey, you NVIDIA Bro shareholders, it's nice of you to provide Jensen Huang with exit liquidity. Thank you very much, John, for supporting the channel. Pigo's Trading Desk says the Dragon Boat Festival is pretty magical. I have never partaken of the Dragon Boat festivities, but apparently it is a very big deal. What was it? 121 million people, I think they said, hit the road. That is a lot of people travel. That's like a third of the population of the U.S. The whole state's hitting the road for one weekend. So what was the actual number? It was, where is it here? 100. Oh, that's the wrong story. Why don't we look at the right story, Jack? That'll help. 119 million. I was way off. 119 million people hitting the road. That is a pretty big deal. I have never seen it, but I hear good things. Thank you, Pigo, for supporting the channel, sir. John says, global blackout, reset. What barter or transaction value could silver realistically carry per ounce? Your take. John, I was having this conversation with one of my neighbors recently. We got together over the weekend, had some burgers, had some beers around a pool. It was a good time. And, we were talking about Bitcoin, right? Because that's whenever you hear global blackout, the gold bugs and the silver bugs like to say global blackout, Bitcoin is worthless or Bitcoin disappears. That's not true. Bitcoin doesn't work until the power comes back on, assuming you don't have battery access. But Bitcoin doesn't disappear. You can't transact with it. It becomes useless. Now, that being said, without electricity, this planet could sustain maybe 300 million of us, human beings, that is. Like, what was the population of the world before electricity? It was under 1 billion. All right. So the idea that, I'll be fine if the power goes out because I've got gold or silver. There's 7 billion of us on the planet right now. And if there's no power, there's no fertilizer, there's no industrial farming, there's nothing to eat. All right. And gold, I'm telling you, gold will lose its value very quickly in that scenario. Yes, gold was money before we had electricity, right? Gold was money for thousands of years. So was silver. And we would eventually go back there, but not before 6.5 billion people are slaughtered first, or starved to death, or die from diseases because of lack of sanitation and clean water. During that transitional period from a modern civilized society to whatever is left over, you're going to want lead more than you're going to want gold and silver, because the only real use for silver in that scenario is going to be taking your silver bar and bludgeoning your nice neighbor over the head to take what they have to eat so you and your kids can survive. So let's hope we never get there. That's not a realistic scenario to plan for, to be honest with you, because even if you're one of those preppers and you're like, oh yeah, I got all that food and stuff in my basement. Well, all the people that live around you with guns, they know you've got that food in your basement and they'll be coming for it when starvation sets in. I don't care how nice they seem at church. When people are starving, they get a little crazy. So the whole preparing to be able to barter during a global blackout, it must be nice, because there's a whole lot of smaller problems you need to handle before you get to that degree of oh my God, the world is ending. So gold and silver better than Bitcoin in that scenario, but I think lead is the grand equalizer in that scenario. So if you really want to plan for that, I think lead is the metal you should be stacking. Let's put it that way, John. Thank you for supporting the channel, sir. Nashville Pasta Man says, hey, Volkswagen, good luck with your layoffs. I hope your firings go really well. Look, I'm going to go, but it's been great. And believe you me, the pleasure has been all on this side of the table, right? Is that the scene we're going to, Nashville Pasta Man? He always leads me to a movie, and we're on the same wavelength there, Pasta Man. Yeah, I know what movie it is, but you're going to let me know down in the comments what movie it is, guys. And if I know the melon heads, I bet at least 10 of you know what movie we are talking about here. But nice talking to you, Bobs. Thank you very much, Pasta Man, for supporting the channel. Raiden, what's going on, Raiden 57, the god of lightning? He says 8+ billion. Are we over 8 billion already? Have we gotten there? Interestingly enough, Raiden, if we're not at 8 billion yet, we're close. We're 7 and change the last I looked. But very soon, we're within a few years of that number flipping and starting to head south. The population decline in basically the entirety of the Northern Hemisphere has reached such a fever pitch. Actually, the only reason the population in the Northern Hemisphere has not been falling precipitously is because of migration from the Southern Hemisphere. But the world population is about to start declining, even though, like all the people who are like, you need to ride a bike to work and eat bugs because climate, all those people are like, there's going to be 1 trillion of us in years and, we're going to run out of room in the world. They're all lying. They're outright lying. All these projections of the world population exploding. No, the world population is rolling over. It's already in rapid decline in Korea, Japan, China, and the United States, if you don't count migration from the South. Same thing in Europe. The world population, it's heading in the other direction. It's getting smaller, which is why I say, guys, it's time for us to drink up and start making bad decisions because, the whole baby thing, science has figured out how to solve that problem. We know how that works, all right? If you're not familiar with the mechanics, the internet is a wonderful tool. I'm just saying, guys. Let's start making babies again, all right? It's kind of sad. And look, the reason why the population is collapsing is because of these a-holes at the central banks and the banking cartels that have figured out a way to treat the middle class like cattle and extract as much from us as they can. And they have taken too much, and now the herd is dying off. And unfortunately, the herd is us in this scenario, and that sucks. So, let's take away their power, and let's all start making babies again. It's going to be a great time. You're going to love it until the kids are born and they start crying and pooping and puking down your back and all that stuff. But, as a family show, we don't need to get into that. Parenthood is great, trust me. Thank you very much, Raiden, for taking me on a wild tangent this morning. And thank you to all you wonderful melon heads for having your coffee with us this morning. Thank you so much, guys. Don't forget that like button and that subscribe button on the way out. Thank you for the super chats and the generosity supporting the channel, as well as you magnanimous melon heads on Patreon and YouTube. Thank you, guys. I got links down below to all that good stuff, should you feel so inclined. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I love you guys. Everybody, till next time, live small and dream big.